Constitutional crisis. Now, I want you to think about something. On this program, I talk about the Constitution all the time. The power of the courts. Right now, far outside what the framers intended. They don't call that a constitutional crisis. The federal bureaucracy, 2 million strong. You won't find that in the Constitution, the entrenched federal bureaucracy. That's not a constitutional crisis. When you have presidents like Obama creating his own laws like DACA, that's not a constitutional crisis. We have Democrats insisting that we should eliminate the Electoral College. Now, why do we have the Electoral College? To make sure the small states are fairly represented. Otherwise, we never would have had a republic. They would never have joined these bigger states. There would never be a country. They say, so what? We have power. We want to get rid of it. When it comes to the Second Amendment, constantly it's under attack. They don't call that a constitutional crisis. The First Amendment. I'm not talking about freedom of press. I'm talking about religious liberty, the free exercise thereof. When that's under attack, Baker's under attack and so forth and so on, they don't call that a constitutional crisis, do they? The 10th Amendment, the Federalism Amendment, which is dismissed completely by the Supreme Court. It's in the Constitution. They don't call that a constitutional crisis. The bastardization of the 14th Amendment to suggest that what was really intended there was that foreigners who come into this country and have babies in this country and are here illegally, that they're now automatically American citizens. They don't call that a constitutional crisis. We have sanctuary cities nullifying federal law and the supremacy clause of the Constitution. They don't call that a constitutional crisis. We have a House of Representatives that intends to delve into the personal business affairs and tax returns and financial matters of the President of the United States, for which Congress has no oversight authority whatsoever. None. They don't call that a constitutional crisis. But now we have a real constitutional crisis, ladies and gentlemen, because the President of the United States, following the Vacancy Act, a real federal law, has decided to temporarily appoint Matt Whitaker, a former United States attorney, former chief of staff to Jeff Sessions, for no more than 210 days as the acting attorney general. Now, you see, we have a constitutional crisis. Now they tell us the statute's unconstitutional. Obama imposing DACA, creating a law in the Oval Office. We have an Obama Ninth Circuit, a Clinton Ninth Circuit, a left-wing Ninth Circuit that says, oh, the President of the United States can't get rid of DACA. You see, Obama can create it, but his successor can't get rid of it. Anybody follow that? Of course not. We have an Obama judge in Montana, of all places, who rules that the Keystone Pipeline cannot be built. 40 to 50,000 jobs will not be created because the State Department didn't do a sufficient or adequate job of taking into consideration climate change. They have now legalized and constitutionalized their wacko ideology. That's not a constitutional crisis. Now, let me walk through this clearly so even Lawrence Tribe, a professor of law at Harvard, can comprehend this. Let me walk through this very, very slowly so a moron like Joe Scarborough can try to digest it and follow the bouncing ball. The President of the United States is the executive branch. Everybody below him is inferior. The only issue is whether we're talking about a principal officer or an inferior officer under Morrison v. Olson, a 1988 decision by the Supreme Court, where Morrison, the independent counsel, her constitutionality was challenged by Ted Olson, who was under investigation, and wrongly so. The court stupidly decided that the independent counsel is constitutional, and they gave a number of reasons for it, various elements that have to be met. And among other things, the independent counsel, they said, well, they're not really independent. They have to report to somebody. There's a special court that's set up, a special division for the Independent Counsel Act that was set up, and so forth and so on. Now, if the independent counsel truly were independent, well, then that would be a problem. Now, why does that matter? Because there's another part of the Constitution, and I've talked about it myself repeatedly, called the Appointments Clause. And what that means is, if you're going to appoint somebody who is in a very senior position, if you're going to appoint somebody in a very senior position, the president must nominate them, and the Senate must decide whether or not it's going to confirm the person. So I've said over and over again, as has Professor Calabresi, well, then that's Robert Mueller. Robert Mueller is the most powerful prosecutor in the United States. He's the most powerful prosecutor in the United States. It's not enough that he reports, theoretically anyway, to the Deputy Attorney General of the United States. That's not enough. The U.S. Attorney in every district, all 91, actually 93, they all report to the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, but they all have to be nominated and confirmed. The special counsel, Mr. Mueller, is at least theoretically investigating the President of the United States. So how is it that he's an inferior officer like an assistant U.S. attorney, and he didn't have to be nominated and confirmed by the Senate? It's a position I've taken and been arguing for quite some time. Now we hear, the news tells us today, as they regurgitate the Democrat talking points, now we hear Mr. Whitaker must be nominated by the president so the Senate has a chance to confirm or not confirm. Now, what's the difference, ladies and gentlemen? What's the difference between Mueller and Whitaker? Anybody know? Whitaker is a temporary appointee. The president can change his mind and send his name to the United States Senate for confirmation, but he's a temporary employee. And under the Vacancy Act, the president is following the rules. He's got good lawyers. This is what he told them to do, and that's what he's doing. Mr. Mueller has no tenure. He goes on and on and on. He's a very, very powerful man. He's more powerful than any United States attorney. And yet, he's not nominated. He's not subject to confirmation, and yet he should be. Yet he should be. Now, there's also practical reasons why the Vacancy Act was passed in the first place. You see how the Democrats slow walk the nominees, right? But the government must go on. They slow walk the nominees, but the government must go on. So the president needs an attorney general, temporary or otherwise. He needs a secretary of agriculture, temporary or otherwise. Then we hear arguments that, well, he has to follow the rules of succession. What does that mean? Well, then he has to appoint the deputy attorney general, Rosenstein, as the acting attorney general. Where's that written? Well, that's what the Constitution compels. Show me. These departments aren't even in the Constitution. These officers aren't even in the Constitution. How does the Constitution compel it? It doesn't. It doesn't. Mr. Whitaker is a acting attorney general with a temporary appointment under federal law. Mr. Mueller can go on and on and on. Now, how do I know Mr. Mueller can go on and on? Anybody know? Because every single Democrat and half the Republicans and the entire media have told us the President of the United States cannot fire Mr. Mueller or he'll be impeached. So Mr. Mueller, in some ways, is more powerful than the President of the United States. Even though the President of the United States is the head of the executive branch, he's not permitted to fire Mr. Mueller. Now, how can that be? Because they'll impeach him. And they want to pass a statute to protect him. All the mental midgets now in the majority of the House, the leadership of the mental midgets in the House of Representatives say, you know what, we're going to attach to a crucial spending bill the protection of Mr. Mueller. Have they passed any such thing for a United States attorney? No. Have they passed any such thing for any other single employee of the executive branch? No. No. And yet Mr. Mueller, they tell us, he's not a principal officer under Morrison v. Olson. No. He's just like an assistant U.S. attorney. No big deal. I mean, he reports to Rosenstein. And here's the other kicker. Congress has no power to do that. Why, Mark? It's called separation of powers. Congress cannot prevent the President of the United States from removing one of his employees, any more than the President of the United States can prevent Congress from removing one of its staffers. The President is in charge of the executive branch. They can't tell him that he cannot remove a special counsel, when in fact he can, under our Constitution and the separation of powers doctrine. Now, everything I just discussed with you took, 10 minutes? You've heard none of it in the media. None of it. Because two reasons, two possibilities. One, they are just damn stupid. The other, they're just damn liberals. Actually, there's a third. They just hate the president. Now, what Congress is considering doing, that would create a constitutional crisis. Now, they call this a broken glass moment. Haven't they keep saying this, Mr. Producer? It's broken glass or something? I want to tell you something. This is the 80th anniversary of Kristallnacht. Broken glass. When the Nazis rose up and started dragging Jews out of their businesses, out of their apartments, out of their homes, out of their cars, beating them, killing them, breaking glass. Do you realize how outrageous it is that Richard Blumenthal and that other Democrats and people in the media keep calling this a broken glass moment? Do you understand why they're doing that? That once again, they're comparing this wittingly or unwittingly, but mostly wittingly, to Kristallnacht and the Third Reich and Hitler. Do you understand that? Then they say it's a slow-walking Saturday night massacre. Do you know why they say that? Because it's not a Saturday night massacre. Because the President of the United States did not order Mr. Whitaker or anybody else to fire Mr. Mueller. Because Mr. Mueller is the all-powerful special counsel who's just like an assistant U.S. attorney. No. He's the all-powerful special counsel. The President hasn't taken one penny from Mr. Mueller or from the FBI in its pathetic, outrageous investigation that was launched in violation of the Department of Justice regulations, where there was no criminal pretext or basis for the appointment of the special counsel in the first place. And notice the same Democrats and media who are saying Mr. Whitaker has a conflict of interest because he wrote an op-ed and he was on CNN. Notice, when it comes to Mr. Rosenstein, who recommended to the Attorney General, who then recommended to the President of the United States that he fire James Comey. And among the things that we're told Mueller's investigating is obstruction of justice when the President fired James Comey. As pathetic as that is. Among other things, it was Mr. Rosenstein who recommended it. Mr. Rosenstein is not merely a witness, as I keep hearing on cable TV. He should be a subject of this investigation. He should be a subject of this investigation. Why didn't he recuse himself? Mr. Nadler, Mr. Schiff, Mr. Swindle, or whatever the hell your name is? What about you, morning schmo? How about fake Tapper? How about Don Lemonade? Or Lemon, whatever, Lemon. How about all of these guys? How come they don't bring it up? They're too busy talking about a broken glass moment. A broken glass moment like this is Kristallnacht. These leftists in the media and in the Democrat Party who keep making comparisons to Hitler and the Nazis and now Kristallnacht, these people are bigots. They are bigots. I'll be right back.
Mark Levin.